Nobody expected it to end this way. MAXX CROSBY had already said goodbye. He had sat in front of a camera for 12 minutes and 58 seconds, nearly 13 full minutes, and delivered one of the most emotionally raw farewell videos an NFL player has ever recorded. He talked about the Raiders. He talked about what Las Vegas had given him. He said he had left everything on the field. He said he felt like he had let the fans down. He said he had zero ill will. And then he had turned the page, publicly, emotionally, completely, toward Baltimore, toward the Ravens, toward a Super Bowl contender that had given up 2 first-round picks to acquire him, toward a new chapter that felt, in that 13-minute video, like the beginning of the most important football of his life. And then Tuesday night happened. And in 12 words posted on the Raiders' official account at 8:02 p.m., 12 cold, corporate, explanation-free words, everything Crosby had said in those 13 minutes became a story without an ending. The Baltimore Ravens have backed out of our trade agreement for MAXX CROSBY. We will have no further comment at this time. No apology, no explanation, no context, just 12 words. And when those 12 words landed on every phone in America simultaneously, when every sports fan, every analyst, every front office executive across the NFL read them, the question that exploded in every direction was not what happened in the physical. It was not why Baltimore walked away. It was not what Crosby's agent would say next, or what the Raiders would do with a $30 million cap hit they thought was gone. The question, the one that detonated the entire NFL offseason in real time, was this: who is bold enough to step in? Who in this league is willing to look at a player that Baltimore's medical staff said no to, pick up the phone tonight, and say yes? And in Cleveland, Ohio, in a facility where Jimmy Haslam has been authorizing moves for 5 straight days that the rest of the league keeps calling the steal of free agency, that question is not hypothetical. It is operational. And the answer may already be forming. To understand the full weight of tonight's bombshell, you have to understand exactly what MAXX CROSBY is. Not the failed physical, not the meniscus surgery, not the 12 words from the Raiders at 8:02 p.m. Who this man actually is, the player, the human being, the story that built him into the highest-paid non-quarterback in professional football. Because that story is the reason the phone lines are ringing tonight. Crosby underwent surgery in early January to address a left meniscus injury he suffered during the 2026 season. The Raiders agreed to trade Crosby to the Ravens for 2 first-round picks. The deal could not become official until the start of the new league year on March 11th. And on that exact date, tonight, the Ravens backed out. Fox News. Crosby underwent a meniscus repair on January 7th, a full repair, not a trim. Those are 2 completely different procedures. A meniscus trim removes damaged tissue and typically requires 4 to 6 weeks of recovery. A meniscus repair sutures the torn tissue back together and requires 3 to 4 months minimum. That timeline meant Crosby would almost certainly not be fully medically cleared before tonight's deadline. So what did the Ravens think his knee would look like compared to what they saw? That is the question the entire league is asking right now, and the Ravens are not answering it. Military Times. Sources across NFL front offices had different views on whether the Raiders intentionally withheld information. One high-ranking NFC executive told Yahoo Sports that a trade of this magnitude would typically involve the exchange of pre-surgery MRIs, post-operation notes, rehabilitation notes, and more, all handed over to the Ravens before a trade could even be agreed in principle. The implication being, if Baltimore had all of that information and still agreed to the trade last week, what did they find in the physical today that was different from what the paperwork showed? Military Times. That question, the gap between what the paperwork showed and what the physical revealed, is the medical mystery at the center of tonight's story. And it is exactly the kind of mystery that the Cleveland Browns medical staff is equipped to investigate independently.
the most terrifying pass rush duo in the history of professional football. That is not an analyst getting carried away. That is a straightforward arithmetic statement about what happens when you combine the highest-paid non-quarterback in NFL history with the player who just broke the all-time single-season sack record. You get a defensive line that no offensive line in any conference can adequately prepare for. You get a situation where double-teaming Garrett leaves Crosby one-on-one, and double-teaming Crosby leaves Garrett one-on-one. And there is no defense that makes either of those one-on-one matchups favorable for the offense. But here is where the reality becomes complicated, because Cleveland has constraints that pure football logic does not address. Cleveland's cap situation after the Watson restructure leaves approximately $18 million in available space. Crosby carries a $30 million cap hit in 2026. Even with creative restructuring, absorbing that number while simultaneously completing the offensive line rebuild and addressing the quarterback competition is a genuine financial challenge for a franchise still carrying the consequences of the Watson contract. Fox News. $30 million for a pass rusher, on top of Watson's unavoidable cap number, on top of the Elgton Jenkins signing, on top of the Zion Johnson commitment. The math is real, and it is not simple. But here is what every analyst covering this situation keeps returning to. The price of acquiring Crosby is not what it was yesterday. It is not 2 first-round picks. It is whatever the Raiders will accept after a failed physical has permanently altered the leverage of every conversation. And the Cleveland Browns, a $6.14 billion franchise operating under a general manager who passed Elgton Jenkins when Green Bay would not, are exactly the kind of organization that can look at reduced leverage and identify an opportunity. The Dallas Cowboys, who offered a first- and second-round pick before Baltimore made their offer, are not expected to pursue Crosby a second time. Sources told ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, "It's hard to retrace what has been done." Dallas is now on the hook for Rashawn Gary's $19.5 million in 2026, along with several high offensive salaries. Fox News. Dallas is out. Baltimore is out. The two teams that had been most publicly connected to Crosby before tonight are gone, which means the field has narrowed dramatically. And in a narrowed field, the team with the medical confidence to contradict a failed physical, the team that just demonstrated that willingness 24 hours ago with Elgton Jenkins, has an advantage that money alone cannot create. Crosby's agent, C.J. LeBoy, pushed back forcefully after the trade collapse, stating that Crosby continues to be on track in his recovery, and if anything, is ahead of schedule, according to his surgeon, Dr. Neil L. Atrosh. He said Crosby remains on track to return during the off-season program and will undoubtedly return as the dominant game wrecker he has been. Military Times. Ahead of schedule. According to Dr. Neil L. Atrosh, one of the most respected orthopedic surgeons in professional sports, a man who has operated on the most valuable athletic bodies on the planet. His surgeon says ahead of schedule. Baltimore's doctors said something different, and the question that every front office medical staff in the NFL is asking right now, in Cleveland, in Chicago, in every city where a phone might ring tonight, is whose evaluation is right. While the trade collapse dominated headlines, the broader free agency chaos continued simultaneously. The Dolphins released Tua Tagovailoa, who reportedly will sign with the Falcons. Travis Kelce confirmed his return to the Chiefs. Kenneth Walker III agreed to join Mahomes in Kansas City. And amid all of it, the biggest defensive player available in the entire 2026 offseason is sitting on a private jet at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night with no confirmed destination. Al Jazeera. A private jet. No words, no caption, just a man who had delivered a 13-minute goodbye to one chapter of his career and had just watched the next chapter evaporate in a Baltimore examination room, sitting in leather, waiting for what comes next. Anyone who watched that 12-minute, 58-second goodbye video understood the severity of the deflation Crosby is experiencing tonight. He had processed leaving Las Vegas. He had made peace with it. He had turned toward Baltimore with genuine excitement. And now he is somewhere above America on a private jet, not knowing which city he is flying toward, or which team will call next, or what his 2026 season is going to look like. That human reality, the emotional weight of a man who said goodbye to the only NFL home he had ever known, committed himself to a new destination, and then had that destination taken away in 12 corporate words, matters. Because the team that calls MAXX CROSBY tonight and makes him feel wanted, makes him feel certain, makes him feel like the failed physical was an organizational mistake rather than a reflection of his value, that team has an advantage that transcends the dollar figures. Jimmy Haslam spent 5 days this week authorizing moves that the entire league called the steal of free agency. He looked at a player Green Bay called a failed physical and paid $20 million guaranteed. He looked at a player the Bears let walk and brought him back on a deal that makes sense. He rebuilt an offensive line that was ranked dead last in the NFL from scratch in 72 hours. He signed a former All-Pro linebacker for $17 million when the Jets paid a lesser player $45 million. Every move has been precise. Every move has been informed. Every move has demonstrated a front office operating with clarity and conviction in the middle of the most chaotic free agency period this league has produced in years. Tonight, the most disruptive defensive player in professional football is available. The failed physical that ended his Baltimore chapter is the same kind of obstacle that Cleveland has already shown it can evaluate independently and contradict confidently. The price has dropped from 2 first-rounders to whatever the market decides, and the Browns already have the best pass rusher in the history of their franchise on the other side of the defensive line. Whether Andrew Berry picks up the phone tonight, whether Jimmy Haslam decides that this is the moment to make the boldest move of his entire ownership era, is the question that every person in Cleveland is asking right now. Whether the answer is yes or no, the conversation is happening. The opportunity is real. And the history of this week in Cleveland suggests that when a player other teams have walked away from becomes available, this front office has already done the homework. The private jet is in the air, the phone is ringing, and the wall being built in Cleveland just got a lot more interesting.
Because here is what the NFL world already knows about Andrew Berry and the Cleveland medical operation. The Browns passed Elgton Jenkins on a physical on the same day, Tuesday, March 10th, that the Green Bay Packers had released him with a failed physical designation. The same player, the same injury. 2 different medical evaluations reaching 2 completely different conclusions. Cleveland paid $20 million guaranteed to a player that another franchise's doctors said was not medically fit to honor his contract. 2 different evaluations. 2 different conclusions. And now, less than 24 hours later, the NFL's most coveted pass rusher is sitting on a private jet with no confirmed destination, available to any team willing to call, after the team that was supposed to have him backed out of a physical that another team might evaluate completely differently. The parallel is not subtle. It is the loudest possible signal the football universe could send to Cleveland, Ohio tonight. But to understand why the Browns should want MAXX CROSBY, not just because he is available, not just because the price has dropped from 2 first-rounders, but because of what he would mean to this specific team in this specific moment, you have to look at what Crosby has actually done in his career, not the contract, the football. Crosby's 5 Pro Bowl years feature 69.5 sacks, 133 tackles for loss, 11 forced fumbles, and 3 fumble recoveries. No player stopped the run more effectively than Crosby last season.
His 39% run-stop win rate led the entire league, while his 125 run-stop wins surpassed the second-place player by more than 50. He also ranked top 15 in pass rush win rate. He did all of this in a season where the Raiders' bottom four offense rarely spelled him, meaning he was on the field for nearly every defensive snap on a bad team with no rest. In one NFC assistant coach told Yahoo Sports, "Max was the most disruptive player I've had to game plan against since Aaron Donald. Every play, every down, game wrecker." An AFC West offensive player said their team needed to ask more from their scout team counterparts in practice leading up to Raiders games than in any other week, specifically because of the challenges Crosby poses. The most disruptive player since Aaron Donald. Those words belong to a coach paid to evaluate the best defensive players in the sport, and they are being used to describe a man who is available tonight, right now, at a price that is lower than it was yesterday morning because a physical in Baltimore did not go the way anyone expected. Now look at where Cleveland's defense stands tonight. Myles Garrett last season recorded 84 total pressures, 45 hurries, 14 quarterback hits, 46 stops, 3 forced fumbles, and played 869 total snaps. PFF gave him the highest grade among all 115 eligible edge rushers at 92.7, the highest pass rush grade and third highest run defense grade at the position. He broke the NFL single-season sack record with 23 in 2025, was unanimously voted the NFL Defensive Player of the Year, and became the first player ever to record 14 or more sacks in 4 consecutive seasons. 23 sacks, a record that has never been touched, in a single season. That is what Myles Garrett produced in 2025. And the question that the entire NFL has been asking for the last 4 days, since before the Crosby trade collapsed, since before the failed physical, since tonight's 12 words, is whether the Cleveland Browns would ever consider pairing MAXX CROSBY on Myles Garrett on the same defensive line. Dog Pound Daily wrote this week that adding Crosby to the Browns' defensive line alongside Garrett would give Cleveland arguably the most terrifying pass rush in the history of professional football. Both players in their prime, both playing at all pro levels, both demanding the full attention of any offensive coordinator preparing a game plan against Cleveland.